Hello and welcome back to my Newbie Does Precision series. Well, I've got about 200 rounds through the rifle, which is really just enough to get a feel for how my choices are working out. Now, for those of you who haven't been following the series, I purchased this Remington 700 AAC-SD as my first dedicated long-range precision rifle. Now, this model has several features that really lend it to that type of use. A varmint profile 20-inch barrel with a 1 in 10 twist to help stabilize those heavier projectiles with the good ballistic coefficients. It also has a threaded barrel for a muzzle device. The limitation is the stock. As I and others have talked about, these stocks are way too flexible. You may even be able to see that moving. To be an effective platform, and off a bipod it really negates the free float. Now, people have done different things to correct that, including trussing the stock. I really don't know that that's worth it though, at least for my uses. And the flex in my stock is all the way back here behind the recoil lug. So I don't know that trussing it or stiffening the fore end would really correct that. At any rate, I knew that when I bought it and planned to replace the stock. What really tipped me towards this model is that at this price point, you get a high quality Remington 700 receiver barreled action basically for less money than you can buy a Remington barreled action, and the stock is more or less thrown in for free. So let's start at the front of the muzzle and work our way back. The muzzle device I chose was the Badger Ordnance FTE Micro. Now, 308 recoil really isn't that bad, so my entire purpose for having a muzzle brake is to be able to get back on target through the scope in time to see my own splash, because I often shoot alone or don't have a spotter. Just about any good muzzle brake will accomplish that, but many of them are just skull-crushingly loud, and that makes it less pleasant and more fatiguing to shoot. It also makes your neighbors angry when you're at a public range. So I was looking for a compromise between the volume and the effectiveness of the brake, and that's why I settled on this Micro. Now, this is adequately effective, and I think that trade worked off. The rifle is definitely louder than with a bare muzzle. However, it's not nearly as loud as rifles equipped with other brakes that I've been next to. Some of them will blow your hat off. But I still can get back just about at any range that I've shot it, which is 100 to 680 yards so far. I can get back in time to see my own splash and call my own shots. So I think that was a good compromise, and it is very well made and finely machined like anything from Badger. The next choice was the Weaver Tactical Rail. It's the Weaver Tactical Multi-Slot Extended Rail, and it's a Picatinny rail scope base. Really, this was a budget move. You can get much better rails, but for this price point, it's nicely machined and has a good recoil lug. Many people have found that they had to bed this rail, and that may be a consideration. If you go up and get a Badger or a TPS or something like that, or Sequence Precision, you probably or may not have to bed it. I lucked out. Once I got the front screws in and was shining a flashlight through the rear to see if there are any gaps, there was none. It seems to be pretty well machined and fits my rear bridge very well. So I didn't bed it, and I haven't had any problems with it wandering or any kind of accuracy issues that I can attribute or associate with the base. So for me, this may have been a good decision, but do be aware that you may have to bed the back bridge if you choose this rail. Scope rings, TPS rings, these things are so finely machined that when you put the scope in, it almost feels like it suctions in. They have really very high contact all around, and they're at a moderate price point. They're about $80 for the pair. Now, where they differ from other scope rings is that you tighten one end down. They're designed to have no gap on one side and to have a gap on the other, as opposed to the gaps being even. And they're milled that way. This makes it much easier to set up your scope, which as someone who's struggled through a few scope setups but has a hard time doing it, doesn't have a lot of experience, I greatly appreciated that. And really talking to other people, it seems that people who do it all the time and don't have any trouble doing it appreciate the ease of these rings. So personally, I think they're well worth the money. Having said that, there are probably rings that would do the job just as well that will cost a little less. Now on to the scope. The scope is the SWFA SS 3 to 15. This scope, again, was kind of a budget move, but you can go much, much cheaper. At its price point, you can get a better feature set than you can with this scope. But I would really challenge you to go side by side with any scope within $200 of this price point, and you will not get as good a clarity. Now, many of you have more experience and may disagree. But really, the optics, I have been very, very impressed. They remain clear out to the furthest range I have access to, which is 680 yards. Really, the only thing that stands in your way is mirage. The glass never gets in your way. It does have some limitations. There's no zero stops. There's no illumination in the reticle. I do like the reticle. It's their mil quad, they call it. It's basically a mil dot reticle. Enhanced mil dot reticle, and it is very easy to use. The scope seems very durable. It tracks perfectly, and I haven't had any trouble with wandering zeros. Really, it's worked very, very well. Again, the feature set might be an issue. If you need illumination, if you want zero stops, these are all things that can be had for this money, but you'll sacrifice a little bit in quality of glass. And that is really what this is about. They've pared down the feature set rather than paring down the quality to get a price point. So you really have excellent quality with a slightly lower feature set, and I can live with that. I'm very happy with this choice. We have run into a problem or two, which we'll discuss in a second. The next thing here is the KRG Bolt lift. And I really like the feel and the ergonomics of this bolt lift. I've run enough of these rifles to know that I want an oversized bolt lift. And this one is very inexpensive, very cost effective, and doesn't require any modification to the rifle. So it's a good one to start with. The problem we have run into is between the scope, has this little dog tail here. Really makes it convenient and fast, gloved hands, slippery hands, whatever you might have, to dial in your magnification. But this little tail, when you're on 3 power in the scope, interferes with the KRG bolt knob. Thing is, I don't want to give up either of them. So I haven't really completely settled on my solution to this. I really like this dogtail, I really like this bolt lift, but they won't work together. Once I'm up at about 4 power, it clears fine. It's just down at 3, and some might argue that you wouldn't like 3, but if you're in a competition or you're trying to go fast for whatever reason, and you run into this interference, slap this sucker down, the next time you go to cycle the bolt, you'll find you locked up. Might take you a second to remember what the issue is. So I may go with a different oversized bolt knob. One thing about the KRG is being a clamp-on, it does extend this way. So the bolt, where the bolt flares out, now begins further up the bolt than it otherwise would. Whereas something where you're milling down the bolt and threading it on, like the Badger or other companies, doesn't do that. It doesn't bring the point of the flare up. That would be just enough to clear this, or at least I think it would. If I can confirm that, that may be what I did. But of course, instead of $28, you're now talking around $100 to get the bolt lift and to get it installed on your bolt knob. So perhaps you get what you pay for. On the stock pad, this is the Triad Tactical stock pad. I'm very happy with this purchase. It wasn't expensive, and it does what it needs to do for this rifle. You can get a little motion out of it, but all in all, it's very stable, and it comes back where it is. It squishes sideways a little, but it comes right back if you have it tightened down well. And I haven't had any problems with repeatability of cheek rest with this stock. It's in the same place every time with this stock pad. Having said that, for a permanent solution, this is not what I would do. Personally, if I'm going to keep this rifle stock, I would go with one of the Karsten or TAC Pro Kydex adjustable stock pads. They require drilling a hole in your stock, but if you're going to keep the stock, I think that that would be a better permanent solution. Having said that, I'm not going to keep this stock, and this stock pad for 30 bucks is something that I can take off this rifle, put on other rifles when I have other shooters that need to adjust their cheek rest. So this is going to be something that's nice to have around and a good temporary solution. Of course, what you all would really like to know is, how does it shoot? Well, I do have some representative groups, but before I show them to you, I'd like to say that the real weak point in the system is not the stock. That's a weak point, but it's not the weakest point. The weakest point is me. There's a reason this is titled Newbie Does Precision, and I'm pulling shots. So a lot of the accuracy problems are right here. Any rate, having said that, I got out there with the best factory ammunition I'm aware of, which is this Black Hills match. This particular load is 175 grain Sierra Match King, which I really like. The first couple of groups I saw were a little disappointing, and this is pretty typical. Have a 1.7 inch group, and I was ready to be depressed, but after just a couple of 2 or 3 groups that looked about like this, they very quickly tightened up on the same trip to this. And this is a 0.89 inch group shot at 100 yards with the Black Hills. And I mean, that's as good as I've ever shot. And so I think we're seeing my limitations, not the rifles. But this has been pretty typical since at 100 yards is just under an MOA. Here's another one of the better ones I've shot at 0.79. Almost all touching. I had one flyer. Without that flyer, this would have been a really good group. And again, that was me. And then with this Hornady, this is a lot cheaper. The Black Hills is expensive, perhaps worth it, around $32, $35 a box. This is down in the 20s, a little more reasonable. This is the Hornady 178 grain boat tail hollow point match. This ammo does have a slightly higher standard deviation over the Crony, and I think that, rather than the bullet itself, is what accounts for most of the accuracy. However, at 0.86 5-shot group, who's complaining? Still shoots really very well, sub-MOA, consistently, if I do my part, at 100 yards. Now we get to the weakness of the system, and that again is the stock. What I did here is I went down prone, and these others were shot off of a front and rear bag. So I went prone and used a front bag and just a squeeze bag in my shoulder in the back to better replicate what it would be off a bipod. With the Hornady ammunition, and this is pretty typical of what I got at 1.15 inch group. I do have a flyer. It would be sub-MOA without the flyer. But again, that's the real world accuracy that I am producing with this system. Now this, I actually took my notes upside down, so it goes this way. Taking the bag off and putting it on the bipod, what I found is the groups not only opened up, but the point of impact shifted up. So I shot a couple of groups like this, and this is pretty typical, 1.21 here. Here I have a 1.58, so not so good, 1.5 MOA there. And again, a couple of flyers, but this is typical of what I've seen off the bipod. I adjusted the scope down a little bit and shot a centered group, but again, 1.69. So pretty typical off the bipod. So what I think is happening is when you put it on the bipod, you're negating the free float, changing the point of impact, and opening up your groups. So the stock will definitely need to be replaced. Taking it out to 300 yards, I had a little more trouble trying to keep it sub-MOA, and I think that's more the shooter than anything. The wind tends to swirl around between the berms in our range, and I actually can more consistently hit a 12-inch gong out at 625 yards at our range, than, which is above the berm, than I can shooting at 300 between the berms, trying to keep that within an MOA or an MOA and a half. But I'm getting there. And what I've come to now after a little practice is basically pretty typical of what we see here. And again, I think the limiting factor here is really not the rifle, but is me. However, this is what I'm seeing with this rig, and this is prone off of a front bag. 4-inch group, so a little over an MOA there, 3.6-inch group, just over an MOA here. And there was no adjustment made for the wind here. Obviously, I had a left to right wind moving my groups to the right. But this is about what I'm seeing at 300 yards. So that needs some dialing in. So I guess what you really need to know is, what did it cost and what would I have done differently? Well, I'll put my costs right up here so you can see what I actually spent on all of this gear and help make your decisions when you're speccing out your own rifle. As far as what I would do differently, frankly, not much. I'm pretty happy with it. I probably would have held off on the bolt lift. At $28, this is a great product and can come off and go on other rifles in the future, so it'll be nice to have around, but I would have just waited until I knew what interferences I would have and what my issues would be with the rifle. I would have spent a little more time using it. I knew I was going to want an oversized bolt lift, but this is not the one for this rifle. So we will see what I end up doing with that. I really haven't decided yet. Other than that, this rifle, understanding the limitations of the stock, shoots pretty well. But for this cost, is it the best choice? Well, if you want to customize your rifle, if you want to dial it in just for you, this rifle really is an excellent core to do that with. However, if you buy an all-in-one package, you may be able to save some money. Savage has some very good offerings, and what they do different than Remington is when they do their base model precision rifle, they put a good stiff stock on it. Not a high feature stock, but one that's usable in this role, which Remington has not done with this model. Secondly, there's the new Ruger precision rifle, which I haven't shot it or seen much in the way of shooting reviews, but looks like an awesome package for the money. One might be better off going with either of those. Either of those choices, you may be able to get, particularly with the Ruger, you can get a rifle that has every capability of where this one will end up, and probably spend $300, maybe even $400 less. So that's a very attractive option if you don't mind an out-of-the-box solution. The nice thing about doing it this way, just like customizing an AR, building your own AR, you're really not going to save money, but you're going to get exactly what you want. So we have some things left to do. I'll get a load worked up. After a little while, I'll get a chassis put on it. And we'll see where I end up, see how these choices were really made. I'm happy with them, but time and my groups will really tell the tale.